Some of the speakers have suggested that we don't care or that safety is not a concern for the community from our vantage point. And I understand the frustration a lot of citizens have in regard to the fracking issue and this particular leachate issue. But I just want to remind our fellow citizens, we live in this community too. We care about this community. We don't want to see it harmed, and particularly none of us here want to see our environment harmed or our water supply harmed or generations coming after us harmed. So rest assured that the mayor, and I must say particularly Director Price, has been incredibly involved in this and as concerned as any of us are about this issue. To suggest otherwise is really an insult, not only to him, but to the people that we select in our city to be superintendents of the various enterprises that they run. These people are experts. They live in the community too. They don't want to see harm to the community any more than any one of us does. So we make the best considered judgments, and you vote on it, and they're tough decisions, and they're not always the best decisions. Sometimes you just have to select from the worst, but you have to make those decisions in government and in life. So with that said, that's an update as to what we're doing on
continue to consider the leachate and the 12-mile pipeline. I have been here long enough to witness this council fight amongst itself over whether or not to impose a $5 license plate fee because they thought it was too much per year to have our constituents pay, and I understand that. We need to understand very clearly as a society that it's not about good and evil and environmental versus evil industrialists. It's not that easy. It's complicated. We as a society want to pay $3 or $4 or $5 1,000 cubic feet for natural gas. We don't want to pay $8. So some people are saying, go for the shale, baby. Drill, 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 because we want our cheap gas. We don't want to pay $8 a gallon for milk. So we have factory farms and we have cheap meat. We don't want to drive four-cylinder cars and have small houses that are well insulated. I don't hear a lot of talk about conservation, so we are faced with evil choices, hard choices. If we are going to make decisions to turn difficult waste products into someone else's neighborhood or someone else's county or someone else's state, so they have to worry about their kids and their landfills and their creeks, we're just passing the buck, which may be the right choice there. I'm not saying it's not. But we have to understand that this stuff that we are choosing to generate as byproducts as a society because of our consumer choices has to be dealt with by somebody somehow, using the best standards, the best, safest standards. And that costs money. As Mr. Price, I was listening to his concise and articulate explanation. What I'm hearing him say is, we can say no to this pipeline and accepting this leachate, which is good. That's a good choice. That's a fine choice. I'm not criticizing it. But there's a consequence. And the consequence is we'll pay more to get rid of our byproducts from our sewer water and stuff that goes in it. And we'll have to raise it by 5%, I think you said, or $500,000, which probably translates to a couple, $3 a month, I think. I'm just guessing, for the average ratepayer. So all of our decisions that we as a city make, and administration as a council, have consequences. And if we're going to choose to take the high road and be as pure and safe as we can, that's fine. We just have to understand that it's probably going to cost more money. And if we want to have cheaper natural gas, then we're just fueling the gas companies to come in and rape the land, in the view of a lot of people. If we want bigger cars, less insulation in our homes, then we have to be prepared to pay the consequence. Pardon me for philosophizing, but this decision is just getting kicked down the road week by week by week because we want to take it seriously. And I think that's one of the concerns we have to have because we represent a lot of diverse interests among our constituents. And we have to take into consideration that sometimes taking the high road is going to cost them more money, as it probably
did want to clarify. I don't want to debate folks about this, but when you have statements that aren't necessarily true, at least for our facility, I do want to clarify some of those statements. First, the issues with the Alliance Wastewater Treatment Plant, their superintendent's Joe Mobley. I used to work for the City of Alliance in the late 90s and was on their city council as well before I came here and moved to Canton. The Alliance Wastewater Treatment Plant has had a number of environmental issues in the past. In the late 90s, while I was with the city, although not, I was a zoning inspector. But we were facing some fairly serious bypass issues, and the city was fined $150,000 by the EPA for discharging into the Mahoning River raw sewage. The leachate issue that the city faced environmental action over was, number one, just to clarify, not American landfill. We're aware of the landfill that they faced the environmental issue with. That environmental issue, there were two problems. One was aluminum dross that was a byproduct of an aluminum smelting process, and number two was an excess of organics that were in the water. But that did have nothing to do with American landfill, just so you know. And there have been decisions made in the past, long before I got here, regarding accepting landfill leachate by truck, and the city's water reclamation facility decided not to take landfill leachate, mainly because of the aluminum dross issue. Now, that landfill in question that caused the non-compliance issue in Alliance has now isolated or segmented the aluminum dross from the main landfill. However, we're not going to be taking waste from that landfill that caused that problem for Alliance years ago. The question was asked, why doesn't the city of Canton have additional steps to render our sludge more safe for the environment? That is also misleading. Our sludge, when it goes into the incinerator and is incinerated into the ash, is about as safe as it gets. That ash is essentially a benign substance, and yet it is still placed in a landfill. We pay a tipping fee with the Kimball Transfer Station that we're in contract with to have that ash taken away, and it's just ash. Meanwhile, the Alliance Wastewater Treatment Plant uses biodigestion. Biodigestion requires heat. Heat requires gas. And to biodigest requires equipment that would take up about an acre. I know that because if you'd like to look at our old biodigesters, they're at the water reclamation facility, and we abandoned those with the plant redesign in the 1970s. To biodigest, as Alliance does, would require a complete overhaul of our plant operation and an entirely new phase to our treatment, which would be alleviated with the membranes. Okay? So the proposed project, we have to meet the EPA requirements for phosphorus and nitrogen removal, replace the biodigestion process, which, by the way, will not lead us to compliance on our effluent discharge permit. The 100,000 gallons per day without charge, while that might sound free, as I indicated when we first talked about this issue, our tipping fee, if we do not reach this deal or some deal that's less money than what we're being quoted by the landfills now, that's the benefit of our bargain. If we don't accept American Landfill's leachate, the cost per ton to process our sludge at the landfill will go from $17 a wet ton to $45 or so per wet ton. That's the quote we've received from the competitors. So in other words, that's a cost to the city of Canton and our ratepayers of about another $500,000 per year in our solids disposal costs. So while I'm not threatening, the fact is that cost, where our benefit is, yes, up to 100,000 gallons per day of landfill leachate, we would be processing that at no charge. However, we are saving 2/3 of the price on the tipping fee, or $500,000 a year in the tipping fee that the landfill will charge us to dispose of our solids. So if we don't take their leachate, our tipping fee goes from $17 a wet ton to $45 a wet ton, which equates to an approximate 5% rate increase to cover that additional cost. And so we're under a 3-year plan right now, and that 3-year plan assumed a $15 to $20 per ton wet fill charge to dispose of our solids. If we don't get to that $15 to $20 per wet ton range to dispose of our solids, we'll have to come up with that money, basically. Finally, it was stated that the feds could just give us more time. Number one, our plan is not directly regulated by the federal EPA. The feds will not give us more time. Our permit is not issued by the federal government, it is issued by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. If this plan isn't under construction and we don't have this matter solved by April of next year, then we won't meet our compliance deadline. And as was pointed out graciously by our president, and I do appreciate council's willingness to continue the dialogue with us on this. And I've been in your shoes in a different community, and I understand, particularly these environmental issues, they're just difficult because we all are concerned about the environment and the safety of this community. As one final anecdotal note, though, and the president of the council alluded to it, and it's not me personally, but whoever is the director of public service of this city and any city, statutory city in Ohio, I'm concerned about our safety, and not just because I live here and because my kids live here part-time anyway, and that I'm concerned about our environment. I'm also concerned because, at least while I'm in this office, the permit holder, literally the responsible party for our compliance and for this permit, when you look at the ordinances that we've adopted that adopt federal law, that person is me. And that is whoever is the service director. And so, naturally, just by way of the legal authority and consequences for not meeting our permit limits, we're not going to advocate something that we don't think at least meets those limits. And I'm not saying that people aren't rightly concerned about what goes into these landfills and what we process, because I can tell you, even without the byproduct of drilling, what is coming out of those landfills in terms of leachate, it's a hazardous substance, it's a toxic substance by definition. But if you look at our own codified ordinances, you will see that our industrial permit and discharge program is regulated and created by a federal statute that's enforced by the Ohio EPA, and that our own ordinances set up the system for treating those toxic substances. But on those particular 4 matters, those 4 items that I discussed, I did want to clarify those because I hate to leave it out there, especially with an individual who's been in local government, who may speak with some authority on that subject, just to let you know some of those distinctions regarding those 4 specific matters. Thank you.
That goes to the landfills. Someone had mentioned, I think on the public here, that you could take that sludge and use it for farming, or can you address that?
Yes, you can, and Alliance has decided to do land application. The land application tends to occur in the outlying townships, which is also the source for their drinking water. And so, from the Gulf of Mexico to the shores of Lake Erie, you'll note, and I've seen firsthand because I go up there quite a bit, you'll see new algae blooms in Lake Erie and dead zones that have not existed since pre-EPA, the 1960s. And the reason for those dead zones and for that algae, one of the reasons, particularly in Lake Erie, is because of the remarkable amount of concentrated organics that is leaching off of the land from land application of not only wastewater sludge, which can be used and is used in the food we eat to grow that food as fertilizer. That's what Alliance does. They sell their landfill, they sell their sludge, and it's it's land applied as fertilizer by farmers. Okay, we have never done that because, as you well know, Canton is the 2nd largest ground source water system in Ohio. And the last thing we want to do with our sludge, and you can do the reverse math, if we're going to save $500,000 when we drop our tipping fee from $45 to $17 a wet ton, we have a lot of wet tons of sludge that we have to process. and to sell that to the community, the surrounding area, with the expectation that that's going to be applied to farmland where, in and around, for instance, the Sugar Creek Water Treatment Plant, which is where, you know, you get a lot of farmland, for instance. We can't really restrict who buys it once we get rid of it, and so Canton has avoided land application as a means of disposal. The other thing that we are aware of, and that is apparently currently being considered by EPA, are dramatically more stringent regulations to municipal waste treaters in terms of whether or not you're going to even be able to do land application with this sludge in the future, given the ever-growing more stringent environmental regulatory.
Well, we're going through our own treatment plants right now. What are we doing with it?
As we speak, the sludge goes through a belt press, which reduces the moisture content to a percentage that is ideal for incineration. The moisture that's taken out of the sludge through the belt press is run back through the plant. The sludge that remains, which I think has about a 20% moisture content, is incinerated and is being incinerated as we speak.
Because I had, I think you were here, Warren, whenever I questioned the fact that that was my committee, and I was questioning why we couldn't take and use that to, as some other cities do, to burn and make their own electricity to run their own plant. You know, I thought that would have been a good thing to go, but now we're going to go into a $90,000 new wastewater treatment plant that's going to come in here, and I have real concerns that we're going to be wasting taxpayers' money with this whole process too. You know, everything comes from the taxpayer one way or another.
Mr. President, sure. Thank you. To produce power from the sewer treatment process, you're relying on the methane gas byproduct, which is then used to run generators, which is then sold back to the power grid. That is a biodigestion process, which is what the Alliance Wastewater Treatment Plant uses, although I don't believe that they generate any power from it. Excuse me. We were approached 3 years ago by a company that was initially called Schmack Energy and then Quasar. They have agreements with the Ohio State University's Wayne County campus as well as the city of Akron. And they, with a federal grant under the stimulus program, were going to be able to fully fund the construction of an energy reclamation facility at our water reclamation plant. Totally paid for by the federal government, 100%. The city wouldn't spend a dime. We would then provide them with our sludge to process in that facility. It would undergo a biodigestion process, but again, that process requires heat to create the methane. All right, so you have an independent fuel that's heating up the sludge to produce the methane gas, all right, which in the end, even with the federal grant paying for 100% of that multi-million-dollar facility, which would have had to have been staffed by, I think, almost 20 people. And, oh, by the way, they would have been permitted to bring in under the contract, well, I think the Worcester facility is taking in like old dog food, you name it, organics that just sit outside and things. But anyway, even though paid for entirely by the United States of America, we still would have had to make up for the costs of producing that electricity. We would have still had to pay a $30+ per wet ton fee to make that facility economically viable for Quasar, even though they're selling that power back to the grid. In other words, even though heavily subsidized with the plant operation we have, that means of producing power still would have cost us double what it cost us to incinerate our sludge now. And so to do the Quasar energy facility would have actually resulted, while we would have been a little greener and we would have been processing our sludge through a biodigester that's hooked up to a generator that would produce some power for us, we actually would have had to raise rates by approximately 3% to fund that increase in the tipping.